You are in the kitchen. Your dog is in the living room. You are not doing anything remarkable, putting dishes away, moving things around, the ordinary noise of an ordinary evening. And then, without thinking, you say their name out loud to no one in particular. Maybe you are about to ask them to move, maybe it just came out, maybe you are one of those people who narrates their evenings and has long since stopped feeling embarrassed about it. From the other room, without being called, your dog lifts their head. Not toward the kitchen, toward your voice. Their ears shift forward. Their eyes adjust their focus to something that is not visible. For a moment, everything about their body reorganizes around the single fact that you just produced sound. Then they decide whether to get up. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just hold the position for a few seconds and then settle back down. You almost certainly did not notice any of this. It was background. It was ordinary. But neurologically, something quite extraordinary just happened. And understanding what it was will change how you think about every conversation you have ever had in a room your dog could hear. Most owners assume their dog responds to their name out of trained association. Pavlovian conditioning. Name equals attention or food or walk, so the name gets a response, which is partly accurate and entirely insufficient. Others assume that dogs understand tone but not content, that the actual words are meaningless and only the emotional color of the voice matters. Some assume that extended speech is essentially noise to a dog, ambient sound that occasionally contains signals worth noting. Here is the problem. When researchers began directly measuring how the canine brain processes human speech, not behavioral responses to commands, but actual neural processing of language structure and acoustic properties, they found something that none of those explanations predicts. They found that your dog's brain processes what you say to them using the same bilateral architecture that human brains use to process emotionally meaningful communication. Not a simpler version, not an approximation. The same organizational structure. And the implications of that finding reach much further than most dog owners have ever been told. In 2016, researchers at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest published a study in the journal Science that used functional magnetic resonance imaging to measure real-time brain activity in 13 dogs while they listened to their trainer's speech. The experiment separated two variables that are almost never separated in ordinary dog research: the actual words being spoken and the tone in which they were delivered. Dogs heard praising words in a praising tone, praising words in a neutral tone, neutral words in a praising tone, and neutral words in a neutral tone. The finding was precise. Dogs showed reward center activation, activity in the brain regions associated with processing positive experience, only when praising words were delivered in a praising tone. Either element alone, positive word in flat delivery or neutral word in warm delivery, did not produce the same effect. Both had to be present simultaneously. What this means is that your dog is not just reading your emotion, they are also processing your words. Not as full semantic content in the way a human processes language, but as categorical signals. This is a meaningful word associated with positive outcomes, or this is not. And they are integrating that word-level signal with the emotional signal from the tone to arrive at a combined interpretation. Your dog is doing two things at once with your speech, things that research assumed for decades that only humans did. There is a second study that makes the neural picture more specific. In 2018, a team at the University of Sussex published research examining the lateralization of dog brain responses to human speech. Lateralization means which hemisphere of the brain is more active in processing a given type of information. In humans, the left hemisphere is primarily responsible for processing the content of language, the words, the semantic meaning. The right hemisphere handles the emotional tone. This division is consistent enough across humans that it is considered a defining feature of how our species processes communication. The Sussex team found that dogs show the same pattern. Familiar human words with known positive associations are processed with greater left hemisphere activation. The emotional tone of those words drives right hemisphere response. Your dog's brain is dividing up the incoming signal by the same lines that yours does. This was not expected, and it was not a minor finding. But here is where it gets really interesting, because the bilateral processing result is not just a neurological curiosity. It has a physiological consequence that plays out in your dog's body every time you speak to them in a certain way. Research published in 2020 by a team at Newcastle University examined the autonomic nervous system responses of 42 dogs to three types of owner speech: directed warm speech, speech aimed specifically at the dog with elevated pitch and genuine positive affect; directed neutral speech, and speech directed at another person in the room. They measured heart rate variability, respiratory rate, and a marker of parasympathetic activation called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. When owners spoke to their dogs with genuine warmth and direction, dogs showed measurable increases in heart rate variability and respiratory sinus arrhythmia within an average of 22 seconds. Not after the conversation ended. During it. Within 22 seconds of warmly directed speech beginning, your dog's nervous system is measurably shifting toward a more regulated, parasympathetically dominant state. Heart rate variability is one of the most reliable measures of nervous system health available to researchers. Higher heart rate variability means the autonomic system is flexible, responsive, and recovered. It is the physiological signature of a nervous system that is not under sustained load. Your voice, when it carries genuine warmth and is pointed at your dog specifically, is producing measurable autonomic recovery in real time, not over days of consistent interaction, within 22 seconds of a single exchange. And this is where it gets deep. Because this physiological response did not appear in any species randomly. It appeared in dogs specifically, and the evolutionary record tells us why. Dogs and humans have been in close vocal contact for at least 15,000 years. During that period, selection pressure consistently favored dogs whose nervous systems responded to human speech as a regulatory signal rather than ambient noise. The auditory system was being shaped alongside the bond, generation by generation, until what we now call your dog responding to your voice became something more precise. A nervous system that was built specifically to use your voice as a recovery mechanism. It is not that your dog learned to find your voice soothing. They were gradually engineered to. Here is the finding that most people struggle with when they first encounter it. In 2022, researchers at Haute-Vosges-Lorraine University published a second major study specifically examining what happens in the canine brain when owners speak to their dogs versus when owners speak to another person in the same room, using identical words and comparable emotional tone. Dogs showed significantly greater left hemisphere activation, the word processing response, when speech was directed at them compared to when the same speech was directed at someone else nearby. And yet the acoustic signal was measurably the same in both conditions. The words were the same, the tone was similar, the volume was comparable. How is that possible? How does a dog's brain distinguish between speech directed at them and speech directed at someone else, when the physical sound is nearly identical? Sit with that for a moment. Because the obvious explanations do not hold. Eye contact is not always present. Body orientation toward the dog was controlled for in the study design. The dogs were not responding to a name being spoken, because the experimental sentences did not include names. The resolution requires understanding something about what dogs track that humans rarely think about. Researchers call it the social gaze cue, the aggregate of microsignals that indicate who in a social environment a piece of communication is being aimed at. Human infants develop sensitivity to these cues before they develop language. A child knows when an adult is talking to them versus talking about them before they understand what either sentence means. The directedness of communication is a pre-linguistic signal that both human and canine social cognition evolved to detect. Dogs are detecting the directedness of your speech before any word-level processing takes place. They know you are talking to them before they hear what you are saying, and their brain responds to that knowledge by opening the auditory processing architecture more fully than it would for speech aimed elsewhere. There is a more recent layer to this. A follow-up study from the University of Sussex found that dogs with more conversational exposure to their owners who narrated their days, talked during walks, spoke to their dog outside of commands and corrections, showed faster autonomic response onset and stronger hemispheric differentiation in response to directed speech than dogs with minimal conversational exposure. Every time you talk to your dog, you are not just communicating, you are training the hardware. Your dog is not simply reacting to your emotional tone. They are processing a two-layer signal, your words and your affect simultaneously, using a brain architecture that is organized around receiving exactly that combination. Your dog is not being anthropomorphized when you talk to them as if they understand. Something in that interaction is landing at a neurological level that behavioral science spent decades underestimating. Your dog is not simply comforted by the sound of your voice. Their autonomic nervous system is moving into measurable recovery within 22 seconds of you speaking to them with genuine warmth and direct address. That is not comfort. That is physiological regulation. And you are the only source in their world capable of producing it through speech. Now think about what this means. A dog who lives in a house where they are spoken to frequently, narrated days, morning greetings that use their name, quiet evening conversation, warmth in the voice during training, is a dog whose auditory processing architecture has been developed and maintained by regular use. Their nervous system has more practiced pathways for receiving you. A dog who lives in a house where speech is mainly functional, commands, corrections, occasional affectionate moments, is a dog whose cortex has had less to work with. The architecture is there. It is waiting. But the hardware develops in proportion to how it is exercised. Your dog is not asking you to be eloquent. They are not asking for coherent sentences or a particular vocabulary. What the research shows is that what they need neurologically is the directedness and the genuine warmth. The fact of being spoken to as if they matter, which they do, which is the simplest and most important thing to remember. There are 3 changes in how your dog responds to your voice that tell you something is wrong and deserve attention. A dog who previously tracked your voice reliably and has stopped orienting to it may be showing early signs of hearing loss. Age-related hearing decline in dogs often begins in the higher frequency ranges and progresses gradually. If your dog has stopped lifting their head when you call their name from another room or fails to respond to sounds that previously got a reliable reaction, a veterinary hearing assessment is warranted. A dog who shows physiological stress cues, lip licking, yawning, flattened ears, averted gaze, specifically in response to your voice in certain contexts, is telling you that their association with those vocal patterns has become something other than safe. This sometimes happens in households where voice volume tends to increase during discipline or stress. The dog has learned to read a certain vocal signature as a precursor to something aversive, and their body responds accordingly before any behavior has occurred. And a dog who shows increased deed rather than reduced arousal in response to warm, directed speech, pacing, whining, jumping, inability to settle even as the tone becomes calmer, may be in a chronic hyperarousal state where regulatory input is not reaching the circuits it needs to reach. This is worth discussing with a veterinary behaviorist because it can indicate that the autonomic nervous system has been in an elevated state long enough that normal soothing inputs are not producing normal soothing responses. The question I want to leave you with is this. When do you most often talk to your dog without intending to communicate anything specific? Not commands, not corrections, not feeding prompts. Just the ordinary narration of being alive in the same space. What does that sound like? And has your dog ever surprised you with how much they seem to track it? Leave that in the comments, because I think most owners underestimate how consistently their dog is listening to them. And I think recognizing that changes something. What we are going to look at next connects to everything we covered today. Specifically, what happens when the voice that has been wiring your dog's auditory cortex for years is suddenly absent, and what your dog's nervous system actually does in that silence. It goes somewhere that most people find surprising and, once they hear it, impossible to forget. You do not need a script to give your dog something profound. You do not need a trainer's vocabulary or a particular protocol. You need your voice aimed at them, carrying warmth that is genuine, in the ordinary moments when nothing else is happening and there is no particular reason to speak. Those moments are the ones their auditory cortex was built for. Those are the moments their nervous system is waiting for. And now you know why.